Good seeing you again, man.
Likewise, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm just, happy to be still not dead. I still haven't died of scurvy yet or anything like that. But
That's good. That's good. You hadn't got the COVID or anything.
yeah, no,
Looking
I hadn't.
healthy.
I managed to somehow avoid that. Like, I guess most of the people that don't have comorbid diseases, apparently, is what we're being told. Are you still? You're in Arkansas still?
Yep, still in Arkansas, man. Just enjoying the lovely weather here in Arkansas. It's crazy downpour right now, but hopefully
Oh,
my
is it raining? Okay.
internet doesn't get cut out at all.
Yeah, well, you're sounding good. Okay, and I saw you guys. Congratulations! I saw you guys just open a new warehouse facility, something. So life is you're doing well, being successful. What you're doing, that's good to see, and
Yes, indeed.
good for you. All right, well,
Appreciate it.
let's get into some stuff because I think you got some good practical knowledge and probably some science behind this. You've been doing this for us. You call yourself the Keto Savage. You are a bodybuilder that I would point out is a natural bodybuilder because I think there's this huge cartoon misconception about what a bodybuilder is, and we're used to seeing these Mr. Olympia guys who are freaking basically chemistry experiments. I mean, they're
Yeah.
shooting up so many damn drugs. I mean, I just don't even know what you believe coming out of those guys. So, but you are showing that you can, you know, have a bodybuilding physique, put on muscle, as a natural guy, but two, without, really any significant carbohydrate, which, again, goes against what a lot of people are taught. So let's talk a little bit about how you got into bodybuilding, how you got into being a keto savage. Tell us that story a
Yeah.
little bit, if you don't mind, Robert.
Yeah, so if we rewind way back when, I was 115 pounds as a junior in high school, and I just was tired of being the small guy. So I looked at my uncle, and my uncle played sports. He got into lifting, and I kind of wanted to emulate that look. So he kind of took me under his wing, showed me what a bicep curl was, and I started just innovating from there. My first gym was a bunch of tractor weights I had laying around my dad's shop, very primitive setup for sure. And then I just started diving in and seeing what, became of it. I didn't really have a coach, so all of my initial education from nutrition and lifting came from Flex magazines and YouTube, which is not really the greatest source for a lot of information. So I did a lot of things the wrong way. I followed a traditional bro diet approach to bodybuilding. 7 meals a day, lots of high glycemic index carbohydrates, a bunch of rice, potatoes, a lot of processed food, a lot of protein, very little fat. And I was able to accomplish, doing very well in the bodybuilding sport with that. So I was able to lose a lot of weight and get really lean, but I developed a lot of eating disorders in the process. My first competition, I lost like 80 pounds in 3 months following that traditional bro diet approach to bodybuilding. But my hormones were all out of whack. My metabolism was all jacked up. I developed those eating disorders, and then it took me several years to kind of recover from those eating disorders. And then I realized there had to be a better way, so I started dabbling in keto way back in 2014 before it was really popularized. But I knew I was onto something. I knew that it worked really well for me and helped me recover from a lot of the things I was struggling with. So I decided I just tried to do a bodybuilding prep with it, despite everybody telling me I couldn't do a show without carbs. Lo and behold, I looked better than I ever had at any of the other competitions, earned my pro card status, all while following a very strict ketogenic protocol with very little dietary carbohydrates.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look back in the history of bodybuilding, I mean, there are bodybuilders that have used more or less ketogenic diets. They go back to the steak and eggs diets of Vince Gironda or
Hmm.
Gironda, however, I don't know how you pronounced it, but so that's not particularly new. And again, you point out that a lot of guys do the bro diet because it does work. It can work, but again,
Yeah.
there are downsides to that, and there's a lot of people that go through bodybuilding, fitness. A lot of women that follow that, and they come in, they're like, they hate it because they're miserable. They wreck their
Yeah.
guts, they wreck their hormones, and so. And I'm seeing this too with the people that I do some consultations with when I put them on a low carb, meat based, higher fat approach, cycling fat in and out, that it's more comfortable for them. They seem to do better with that. Let me ask you, so you've been doing this for how many years? Again, just remind me because I missed it.
I've been bodybuilding for 12 years now, and I've been ketogenic for about 6 of those years. So about half my time bodybuilding has been in a keto state.
So what about, let's just talk about some sort of misconceptions. What about overdrive of cortisol, shutting down your thyroid? These are some of the criticisms of long-term ketosis. Have you experienced that? Have you seen others that have experienced that? What is your thoughts on those sort of concerns?
You get that a lot for sure. I mean, you hear that's a very common concern. And I mean, I've been strict keto now for 6 years. I haven't gone in and out. I haven't had carb up days. Like, I've been strict keto for 6 years, and I'm just one in several large, population pool that's done that. You don't have to have those adverse effects. Now, I would say that it's really important to have periods of time in which you are in a caloric surplus, or at least a caloric maintenance, so you're giving your body ample time to recover from a very strict dieting protocol. Like when I'm doing a competition prep, for instance, that typically takes 4 to 6 months, and then I'll spend the next 3 to 6 months reverse dieting out of that deficit in the next 3 years at a maintenance or surplus intake. Because if you do chronically diet for, year after year after year, like a lot of people are compelled to do, they want to lean out every time the summer comes around, that can have some adverse effects from like a metabolic standpoint, from a thyroid standpoint, from a hormonal standpoint. So having legitimate periods where you're at a caloric maintenance or surplus to fully allow your body to recover and reestablish a healthy baseline is absolutely key. But I think as long as you're doing that, you can stay in a strict state of ketosis without carbohydrates and be totally fine.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about those three things, surplus, maintenance, and then I guess, refeeding or, caloric surplus. How do you determine how that is? How does each individual do that? I know you've helped other athletes, I think, but like, what does that look like? And I want to get into protein as well, because I think there's, the protein question is one it's a very important question to ask, so let's talk about, what is a surplus? How do we determine that? How much of a surplus? What is our goal of that surplus? And then obviously not everybody wants to be a bodybuilder. I mean, I'd say I would argue the majority of people don't, but I mean, everybody would like to be at least in reasonable shape, I would say.
Totally. So I'm actually writing a book on this very topic, so we can go super deep here if you want. But on a high level view, basically the first thing you want to do is establish what your individual metabolic and caloric baseline is. And it's going to be very different for everybody. But there's a bunch of calculators online. I don't put a whole lot of weight in most calculators. The best thing you could do is just track your intake and see what you're consistently consuming on a regular basis without experiencing much fluctuation in weight or composition. Like once you can establish what your baseline is, then you can know, okay, that's my maintenance, at this activity level, at this caloric intake, at this macronutrient ratio, my weights and composition is pretty much staying constant. So once you've established your maintenance, if that is in fact a healthy maintenance, a lot of people chronically undereat and then that maintenance is far too low to actually start a cut. But if that is a healthy intake and then you start titrating, then you start really getting into the manipulation of your macronutrients, the ratios, the calories, et cetera, et cetera. So once you've established that maintenance, for me, what my protocol consists of is basically I'll start gradually titrating dietary fat down while simultaneously increasing protein. I'll start at about an 80% ratio or 80% fat ratio, in which 80% of my calories are coming from fat, just to ensure that I'm in a deep state of ketosis. And then I'll start increasing protein while simultaneously decreasing fat. That's going to result in a net loss in total caloric intake because fat has more calories per gram than protein. So once I establish that protein threshold, I like to call it, so basically that point at which my protein is higher than it was earlier, and I'm starting to experience some degree of adverse effect, and then I'll start titrating both protein and fat down, which is going to enhance and increase the rate at which my total calories are dropping, all the while I'm losing weight, losing body fat, and improving my composition. Once I've done that for several months, and there's a lot of nuance here, but once I've done that for several months, usually 3 or 4 months for me personally at this point, I'll start to be in a deep enough of a deficit that I can start to experience some down regulation in my metabolic rate. And that's when I'll introduce ketogenic caloric refeeds. So not carbohydrate refeeds, but just simply an increase in dietary fat and dietary protein. Usually I'll start at about a 30% increase in calories from what my day-to-day consumption is at that point. And then I'll sometimes experiment with 2-day consecutive refeeds in which I'll have like a Friday, Saturday refeed. And then I'll do that for a month or so. And that pretty much leads up to the competition. In my case, whatever it is people are trying to peak for, whether it be a photo shoot or just be the leanest they've ever been before or competition. But I'll use those refeeds to really kind of heighten the physique that I'm bringing to the table and just my ability to get leaner and leaner. Because as calories drop, having those keto caloric refeeds kind of offsets your average caloric intake for the week, and you're able to take your daily caloric intake a little bit lower in the context of having those refeeds, especially when it comes to protein, because your protein is going to be lower at that point, at least following my protocol. So having those 1 or 2 day, consecutive refeeds in which protein is quite elevated, it just keeps your body humming at a nice rate, keeps your metabolism upregulated in the context of being in an overall caloric deficit. And then you can leverage those refeeds to transition into a reverse diet after that fact, because you can't stay, sub 5% body fat indefinitely. So you can leverage that refeed and then do a reverse diet, bring calories back up, ramp up metabolism, and then transition into more of a sustainable maintenance or surplus intake.
That's good stuff. A lot of stuff in there. So I'm just going to pick it a little slower for people that didn't catch it. So basically, you're sitting in maintenance, 80% macronutrient ratio is basically a 2-to-1 ratio. You bring up a little bit of protein, you drop fat a little bit, maybe it's 10%, 10%, and then you said you keep doing that. You keep tilting the lever more towards protein, less towards fat, until you see adverse things start to happen. And then you go into a direct total caloric deficit. What do you mean by adverse things start to happen? What happens? What are the adverse things you're seeing?
So what I've noticed in myself and the hundreds of clients I've worked with is that there's a point of diminishing returns when it comes to overall protein intake. Like I don't want people to be afraid of protein. A lot of people in the keto space are worried about gluconeogenesis and they steer away from protein. I don't ever want to encourage that. But there is a point of diminishing returns in which just overconsumption of protein is not really going to yield the results you're looking for either. So I like to start at a relatively low intake, still a healthy, adequate intake, but that 80% ratio at my maintenance calories, satisfies that for me. And then I can increase protein. So I'm trying to remember what my last competition prep was to give some tangible numbers, but I believe I started at like 150 grams of protein, something in there, 130, 150, and I weigh 175, 180, and I increased that dietary protein intake up to about 200 grams a day. And then for me, I started experiencing some adverse effects in the form of decreased blood ketones, increased blood glucose, a bit more bloating, a little bit more brain fog, decreased sleep quality. That's pretty typical. Like in my clients, I noticed that when they start seeing many of those effects all simultaneously, and it's not attributed to outside variables such as their menstrual cycle or something like that, then I can kind of hone in on what their individual protein threshold is. And then at that point, I'll start decreasing calories. And as calories drop and you get towards the tail end of a cut, having that lower protein intake, it's kind of funny because traditional bodybuilding wisdom suggests that when calories are low, you need to have additional protein to maintain the lean mass that you've built over your building phases. However, what I've found is that towards that latter part of a contest prep, when you're in a deficit, actually consuming less dietary protein and more dietary fat results in a deeper level of ketosis, and ketones, as we all know, are very anti-catabolic. So I actually experienced less lean tissue loss by having a lower overall protein intake and a higher fat ratio. And that just allows me to maintain the lean mass I've built over the years. And I can really function at a higher rate, both from a cognitive standpoint and just an overall energy and performance standpoint.
Yeah. So when you get down, like you said, maintenance 80% fat, 20% protein-ish or so, or maybe there's a small amount of carbohydrate in there, but how much does that ratio shift? I mean, are you getting, and then when you're right at that contest phase, what does it look like? So you start out 80-20, you maximize your protein to 220 grams. What are you at there? Are you like 60%, set 50% protein fat, or where are you at when you maximize?
I'm between 67 and about 70. So about a 1-to-1 ratio. I think I started switching mine once I hit 200 grams of protein, 200 grams of fat. So for me, that 1-to-1 ratio is when I start to notice those adverse effects. And that's different in the context of whether you're in a caloric deficit or in a caloric surplus. Like none of this stuff is static. It all changes and it fluctuates based off of your composition, your degree of muscle maturity, and all of that. So all of these are, individualized numbers and metrics for sure. But once I personally get to about that 67 or 70% of my calories coming from fat, that's when I start to experience some of these adverse effects from an increasing protein intake.
And then let's talk about your training aspect, because are you modifying your training? As your protein goes up, are you lifting heavier? How does your training? Is your training pretty static year round, or is it does it? Obviously, what about energy? Are you finding energy up or down as you play with these macronutrient ratios?
So a lot of people think that as you try to transition into a cut, you need to do less weight, more reps, which is kind of just age-old folklore. But what I found works the best is if you try and continually lift heavy year round, like lifting heavy, having proper volume. Obviously, you don't want to just do 1 rep maxes all day long, but having a a good stimulus in the body in the form of lifting heavy is going to ensure that your body keeps that lean muscle tissue. Like if you are starting to drop calories and you no longer lift heavy, you're basically sending a signal to your body that, hey, we don't need the muscle to lift this heavy weight. So let's go ahead and be catabolic and sacrifice this lean muscle tissue. So continually lifting heavy while in a caloric deficit is key. So my training, my resistance training, honestly doesn't really change that much throughout a building phase or a cutting phase. What does change is my cardio. I'll start to gradually increase my, cardio as I'm getting deeper and deeper into a prep, just to keep things moving. Like at any point, if my nutritional manipulations alone kind of result in a plateau, I can gradually increase the cardio a little bit to just offer more of a stimulus. But honestly, I keep my training pretty constant. I'm incorporating progressive overload and trying to lift heavier, as I go through the year, but I'm not really having a massive shift in training style between a contest prep phase and a building phase.
Yeah, let's dig a little deeper into the muscle sparing effects of ketogenic diets. I mean, do you have any more information on that? I mean, I know there's been some literature on it, but the physiology behind why that may or may not be occurring?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different confounding variables here, a lot of different supportive variables. But when you look at like testosterone, for instance, hormone testosterone is obviously very conducive to building and maintaining lean muscle tissue. In the context of most traditional bodybuilding, they take their fats very, very low. And like testosterone, like the precursor to testosterone is cholesterol. And that's obviously more common in higher fat-based nutritional protocols. So I've gotten my blood work done, in the off season, in the contest prep, and I've compared that to what I was at when I was not following a ketogenic protocol. And my natural testosterone levels are much, much higher on average since I've been ketogenic versus what I was eating carbohydrate based. So that alone contributes to maintaining and sustaining any lean mass that I've built over the years and building more lean mass. Plus, I've noticed just from like an overall recovery standpoint, I don't have near the inflammation as I did when I was eating carbohydrates. So my training frequency has improved because I can train, like for instance, I used to not be able to do squats but once a week because my joints just wouldn't let me. Now I could do squats every other day if I wanted to, simply by being, keto adapted, my joints function at a much better rate. So that's the case for sure. And then with regard to just overall, ketones, circulating ketones in your bloodstream, like you're going to have more of a cognitive benefit than competitors that are just taking their fat way, way down, and they're basically running in some sense on protein and carbs for fuel when they're in a very steep caloric deficit. I mean, that's why they're walking around like zombie. That's what gives bodybuilding a bad name right there, because they can't even function. I mean, I've been there, I've done that, and like productivity is non-existent. Whereas now, like in a ketogenic state, in the context of a caloric deficit, I function at a much higher rate, both physically and mentally.
Yeah, let me ask you, because overall calories, because how many calories are you taking in? How low do you go? Like normal maintenance is how many calories? How low do you go with a cut when you're at the really super lean place?
So calories is another interesting topic. For me, my maintenance, this can be highly individualized, but my maintenance exists between, there's a pretty broad window. So there's not like a set number that this is your constant static maintenance. I can eat between 2,900 calories and about 3,700 calories. And anything in that window is not really going to result in me gaining or losing much weight. I'll feel differently at those different ends of the spectrum, but I have a pretty broad window for my quote unquote maintenance. Once I start diving deeper into a caloric deficit, I get down to about 1,650 or 1,700 calories at the very end of my contest prep, but that's also when I'm introducing those keto caloric refeeds, and those refeeds may consist of a 3,500 calorie a day, for instance. So I'm having very low total daily calorie intake, but I'm also having those refeeds to kind of make my average intake for the week much, much higher. But that is about as low as I personally would go. And honestly, there's not a reason, like I see a lot of coaches prescribe very, very, very low calorie intake for their clients. I mean, if your coach is recommending you go below 1,000 calories, then I would just recommend you fire your coach, because there's no need for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of misery in the bodybuilding in those communities with these people that are just so low on their calories. I think that's interesting. It probably makes training a heck of a lot more pleasant when you're not going at 1,000 calories. I mean, that's got to be pretty good.
Yeah.
And so, again, to reiterate, how much fat are you eating when you're ripped? I mean, what percentage of your calories are coming from fat? How many grams of fat are you able to eat and still maintain that 5% body fat?
Quite a large percentage. I mean, so I'll start at the 80%, and then I'll do the 1-to-1 to find my protein threshold, and then I'll start taking both protein and fat down. But I'm doing so in which my dietary fat intake is decreasing at a slightly less aggressive rate than the protein. So by the end of that phase, when I start increasing, or when I start incorporating the keto caloric refeeds, my fat ratio is definitely north of 75%, usually north of 78%. And then at the very end, in the context of those refeeds, I may be at like an 82% fat ratio. But at that point, my body is incredibly lean. When you're at 3% body fat, you can get away with eating a lot of concentrated dietary fat, and your body's not going to just harbor it all and store it as adipose tissue. It's just using it and running through it pretty quickly. And I'll use fat and protein as a way to fill out and look my best on stage, whereas most competitors are using carbohydrates. I'll just use fat and protein to fill out and have that pump and that vascularity that the competitors are looking for.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point because, you are in a relative caloric deficit. There's no doubt 1,600 calories relative to 3,700 is a definite deficit. And despite the fact that you're eating a lot of fat relative, most of those calories are come fat, as much as 82%. And so therefore, there's people out there, they'll say, it's protein to energy ratio. And if you're eating a lot of fat, you're going to get fat. And I always put the caveat on that. I think it depends if you're in a caloric surplus or deficit, because when you're in a deficit, I think you can definitely run higher fats. And I think as you're seeing that, I want to ask you about the refeed days, 3,500 calories. What does that look like? Where are the fats coming from? How, and then as you get leaner and leaner, are those refeeds coming more frequently? Is that what you find, that you have to refeed more frequently, or what's the frequency look like?
I'm typically doing either 1 or 2 refeeds a week. And on the weeks where I'm doing 2, it's pretty much a consecutive refeed. So the shows are generally on Saturday. So I'll do like a Friday refeed. And then if I want to do 2, I'll do a Thursday, Friday refeed. And as far as the fat sources go, I'm typically doing like an OMAD approach to my nutrition at this point, because the calories are low enough that I would rather have 1 large meal instead of 2 smaller meals. So what I've found work really, really well, like my body absorbs it really well and I don't get any bloat. And that is, I have like a fathead pizza. I don't have any adverse effects to the cheese or the dairy, and I'll put anchovies on that pizza to increase my sodium intake. And that really draws in all the, any subcutaneous water I have, it draws that into the muscle tissue. And then I expel any additional water, so I can really bring that peeled, dry, shredded look to the stage. So that's worked really well for the refeeds. I also use the keto bricks as, a way to get that fat in without having to experience any bloat or anything like that. That coupled with a fattier option for meat, like a 75-25 or 80-20 ground beef, I can pretty much hit my numbers with that and be good to go.
Yeah, you mentioned the Keto Brick. That's one of your products. You guys have done very well with that. One thing I was looking at, because I've been really curious, because we have a number of diabetics in this group, and I'm really trying to figure out how do we treat diabetes, how do we fix it. Back in the 1920s, there was a guy named Louis Newberg, and one of his partners, University of Michigan, called Marsh, and they were doing a very high fat approach to treating diabetics. And basically, what they were doing, this is what the diet looked like when they had a fresh diabetic that was like on their deathbed. I mean, these guys were sick as could be. They were in DKA. They were, blood sugar 600s, 500s. They had infections. These are type 1s who were about ready to die, basically. And he started out with about 1,000 calorie, diet to start with, and it was about almost 90% fat, and then it was about something like 25-30 grams of protein. It was like 100 grams of fat, or somewhere in that neighborhood. And I look at the Keto Brick, and that's Keto Brick macronutrient ratio. That's almost the ideal thing. So you could probably say, you could feed people, a diabetic just Keto Bricks, have maybe 1 Keto Brick a day for a month or 3 or 4 weeks until their blood sugar totally normalized. And then what they would do is they would ramp up their calories, and then they would go to 1,400, and then 1,800, and then, depending on the size, maybe 25 to 3,000 calories. People back then were 120 pounds. They weren't, the caloric numbers look a little different than they do today when we got different people. So I thought that was interesting. So tell us a little bit about the keto brick. Now, I want to let people know, obviously as a carnivore community, some of us are probably not going to be as excited about it because it's not 100% carnivore, but talk about the macronutrient ratios, how you came up with the keto brick, how you've utilized it for yourself and other people as people are utilizing it for their goals.
Yeah, so the keto brick was never meant to be a product. I didn't set out to make a business with it. I made it strictly for my own personal use and benefit as a competitor during my 2017 contest prep. I wanted to find a way to get the fat ratio in, the fat macros in, and do so in a very, dense, low volume food product that made my meal prep easy and didn't result in any kind of bloat or GI discomfort, because that's obviously not optimal when you're trying to, step on stage and look your best. So I started just formulating with different ingredients and had several generations of the keto brick. And then I refined it, and it just worked. It worked really effective. It provides me a ton of energy. Like each brick, depending on the flavor, is about 90 grams of fat, 30 grams of protein, and 12 to 8 grams of carbs, depending on what flavor we have. And that just doesn't have any kind of GI upset for me. It didn't result in any adverse effects whatsoever. My blood sugar stays completely stable, and it gives me a good supply of energy. I've also started using it for, being outdoors. People use it for just busy individuals that don't have time to cook and meal prep, campers, hunters, stuff of that nature. But for me, it's just I'm pretty much carnivore except for the bricks. Like I eat a meat and brick protocol, and carnivore is great, but it's hard. Like for me, it's hard to really hone in the fat ratios if I'm doing just a standard carnivore diet, unless I'm eating a whole bunch of suet or lard or oils. And I just got tired of that. I want something texture. I want something that just took a lot of the guesswork out of it. But I can have a keto brick, and depending what my macros are, I can have that with a leaner cut of meat or a fattier cut of meat, and pretty much work across the spectrum as I transition from an 80% fat ratio to a 70% fat ratio. And depending on what fats or what proteins I'm using, I can hit those numbers pretty effortlessly in tandem with the keto brick.
Yeah, one thing I notice in the keto brick is the major fat source is actually cocoa butter, which I'm not sure why. I'm not just going behind it. One of the thoughts in the communities, a lot of people talking a lot about stearic acid, and we know that cocoa butter is probably the richest source of stearic acid out there. Behind that would be the animal fats, the tallows, and then lards, and then you get down into butters and stuff like that, and then the other fats that don't have much. But so was that one of the driving factors, or was it the texture, was it the flavor profile? What made you to choose cocoa butter as your main fat source?
I would love to take credit for the stearic acid and think that was why I started the brick, but that's not the case. I picked cacao butter initially simply because of all the different fat sources that had the highest melting point. So it just made them staying shelf stable much easier. Like any other fat bombs out there, they're going to melt at room temperature, whereas the bricks are not. So it makes them very shelf stable, and I could transport them and take them without having to worry about them just melting. Now, if you leave them on your dash in the middle of Arkansas summer, they're going to melt eventually, but generally speaking, they're going to be fine. But now that I've dug in and learned a lot more, since getting into the ketogenic community and carnivore space and just analyzing different types of fats, now that I know about the stearic acid content, it just makes me that much more confident, and it is a viable product that can be leveraged as a performance product instead of just a snack bar.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on the stearic acid, and there's a lot into this, but saturated fats, there's lots of different types of saturated fats. Stearic acid is an 18-chain molecule. It's one of the longest saturated fats. And if we look at the saturated fats, you start at the bottom of the short chains. You've got acetate, and then you've got propionate and butyrate, and then you go up into the mediums, which are caproic, caprylic, and then you get it, and lauric acid, and you get into myristic, palmitic, oleic, and stearic acid. And the studies that have been done on these individual fatty acids, and it's weird because food doesn't come that way. It's always a mixture. So you're never going to eat pure stearic acid, but it seems to have a lesser effect on cardiovascular outcomes. And some people think it's mediated through LDL, but it's just one of those things out there. There's kind of an interesting thing about that. So that's just kind of an interesting, I guess, fortuitous. Maybe it has an effect, maybe it doesn't, but it works for why you did it is why it works. It keeps it shelf stable, and it keeps it in a thing, so it doesn't turn into a pool of mush like some people might. Some of the fat substitute things, they come in and are just totally mushy. Somebody want to ask about your workout style. Are you a slow time under tension? I mean, they're talking about lifting to failure? How frequently do you train a muscle group? Just what's your overall philosophy on how to make the muscles grow?
Yeah, so as a natural athlete, especially, you want to have a little more frequency than just hitting a single muscle group once a week. So I'll typically try and target a single muscle group at least twice a week. And what I found works really well is I've implemented this 8-day rotational split. So basically, in that 8-day period, I'll hit every muscle group twice, and I'll have one of those periods being a heavy focus in which I'm doing a few less reps, probably in the 6 to 8 rep range, but a heavier weight, heavier load. And the second time I hit that same muscle group, I'm doing more of a hypertrophy focus, so a little bit lighter weight, but a little higher rep range, around the 12 to 15, sometimes 20 rep. That way I'm able to target the same muscle in two different ways, target the different muscle twitch fibers differently, and just kind of focus on getting a full spectrum effect on and stimulation of any given muscle group. So I'll typically pair, I believe right now my protocol is I'll have a squat day, a standalone squat day, and then I'll have a heavy back hypertrophy bicep day. I'll have a heavy chest hypertrophy delt day. I'll have a heavy tricep hypertrophy chest day. And I basically just pair, correlated muscles, and then I'll have a heavy day and a hypertrophy day. So I'm just kind of tackling the full range of the spectrum there.
Yeah, and then are you, like I said, you mentioned, heavy rep singles. What's your rep range typically? I mean, obviously it's going to change. It's going to depend on the body part, but I mean, are you mixing it up? Or are you kind of more of a high rep guy, low rep guy? What are your thoughts?
So for the heavy compound lifts like squats, deadlifts, bench press, overhead press, I'll typically do those on the heavy days, and I'll target a lower rep range. What I've been doing and what I really, really enjoy doing, like for squats and deadlifts especially, is I'll start at like 135, for instance, and then I'll just increase by 10 pounds on each side of the bar in that 6 rep range. And I'll just continue to add 10 pounds on each side of the bar until I can no longer hit that 6 rep mark. And then I'll drop the weight in half, do like a drop set or something of that nature. But by doing that very, very slow increase in weights, by the end of a squat day, I'll have done sometimes 13, 14, 15 sets. And it's just doing squats on squat day. But it allows me to just really focus on the form and ensure that I'm getting full muscle contraction and range of motion. And not like I see a lot of people, they get antsy in the gym, especially if they're less mature with their lifting, and they'll try and increase the weight too rapidly, and they'll start jerking the movement, and that's just going to result in injury. So you have to take ego lifting totally out of the equation, focus on stimulating the muscle, do the full range of motion, and then not worry about the weight. Like, you want to lift heavy for sure, but not at the expense of truly stimulating the muscle. I believe Lee Haney said, "Stimulate, don't annihilate." I've always tried to kind of lift accordingly.
I think Lee Haney, I think he was 8-time Mr. Olympia. I can't remember how many.
Yeah, 8-time.
Something like that. Yeah, I remember him when I was growing up. I've been lifting for 40 years and stuff, so I've done kind of it all. I've seen that, everything you can possibly imagine. And I think that's a good, thought for, bodybuilding. It's about muscle stimulation. It's not about how much weight's on the bar. Although, you stimulate more muscle when you have a little more weight on the bar or machine. Absolutely. Or whatever, that's the type of thing. Do you find, let's talk about recovery, injuries. Do you find that there's a difference? Do you find that diet has helped or hindered you in any way in that capacity?
Yeah, compared to what I was feeling like before I started doing the ketogenic approach, I just would have a lot more inflammation in my joints. Now I can recover much, much faster. I've been running every single day just because I like it. It's a good time for me to meditate and listen to audiobook, not so much for cardio, just as a way to get outside and break up the monotony of sitting at a desk all day. But I'll run at least a mile, sometimes 2 or more every single day, in addition to the lifting. And I'm not having any kind of lingering pain, joint pain, knee pain, any of that. My body's able to recover pretty rapidly, especially in the context of having, I think the higher fat ratio helps a lot with that. When I start to get really, really high on the protein, and I'm trying to establish that protein threshold, I'll notice a little bit more flare up and joint pain, come to the surface. But with me having a pretty high fat ratio year round, I don't really have any kind of nagging pains at all.
Yeah, that's something that I found for me, particularly when I went carnivore. It was like and as you get older, you have more wear and tear and more chances for things to ache, and that stuff just pretty much went away. And that's something we're seeing pretty interesting in both the ketogenic and the carnivore space. And I think that's a very underrated facet of performance and, accomplishing your goal is not not hurting. If your knee hurts, you're not going to want to do 15 sets of squat that day, and you're going to
Yeah.
probably kind of find an excuse not to do it because it causes you pain. So this year, you were prepping for a bodybuilding contest and it got shut down. Tell us a little, how did that go for you this year? Were you pretty pleased with where you got?
That was brutal, man. I started my 2020 competition prep series in November of 2019. So November 1st hit, I started getting everything, lined up. I started prepping on my meals and officially starting the prep. So I basically went through Thanksgiving, went through Christmas, went through all the holidays, eating a consistent meal protocol without, indulging. And then I dieted down. My first show was, I believe, in May. I'm not sure, but I had been dieting for about 20 weeks, I believe. And then the first show, not the one that I was going to peak for, but the first, prep show, basically, I was getting ready to start, incorporating all the peak week strategy. And I got the email 1.5 weeks before the show was lined up that it got canceled due to COVID. So that was rough, man. It's rough because bodybuilding, it's viewed as a physical sport, but it's not. I mean, it is a physical sport, but it's much more so a mental sport. Like to train consistently, to hit your macros to the T and not sacrifice, not deviate, not, differ from the plan, to have like the utmost definition of consistency and discipline just wired into you on a day-to-day basis. And then to do all that work and have all that sacrifice and then have it just be lifted from you a week and a half before it was all supposed to come to fruition was tough. So what I did was I just found a photographer that was willing to schedule a photo shoot on such short notice. And I basically treated that photo shoot as my quote unquote competition day. And I went through the peak week protocol, did the refeeds and everything, and basically peaked for that photo shoot. And yeah, I was very happy with how everything looked. I had another 2 weeks until the show that I was going to peak for originally. So that would have resulted in me losing a little bit more body fat and bringing a better package to the stage. But I came in at about 10 pounds or about 8 pounds heavier than I did in my 2017 competition. So I've definitely built some solid muscle since then. And I was very pleased with the way it all looked.
That's outstanding. I was going to get at the point of, were you heavier? Did you put on more muscle? Sounds like definitely. So 2 questions came in. And I know the answer to one. Well, I probably know the answer to both of these, but Michelle's asking, hey, can you make a variety of your keto bricks with a beef protein isolate? And you can tell us the answer to that because I know it already exists. And then the other question is, would you change anything for somebody that's not taking any carbs in at all, like some of these carnivore people, as far as your protocol, as far as fat to protein ratios? And then, the small amount of carbohydrate that makes it into your diet, what do you see the purpose of that? Is that just for convenience, or do you find it affects you positively, negatively?
Yeah, so to answer the first question, we do have several 100% grass-fed whey versions of the keto bricks now. So we started out using a vegetable-based protein powder, and honestly, a lot of people absorb that much better than the whey varieties. That's just why we have several flavors using that. But we have just introduced several flavors that are using 100% grass-fed whey. So for anybody that wants to try that, go for it, ketobrick.com for those. As far as what you would do if you're following a strict carnivore approach and you're wanting to follow this protocol laid out from like a contest prep or body recomposition standpoint, the minuscule amount of carbohydrates that I consume, I mean, it's literally, sometimes as low as 5 total grams, up to about 15 total grams. Like, those are negligible. You can have 0 total carbs and it wouldn't really have any difference whatsoever in the package you're bringing to the stage or your ability to recomp under this protocol. I mean, those trace carbs for me are coming from heavy cream, eggs, the keto bricks, and that's pretty much it. Like, I didn't really consume hardly any vegetation over the course of this contest prep. There's a couple of nuts I put in, some sauerkrauts, maybe a pickle here and there, or maybe some mushrooms, but that's literally the extent of any dietary carbohydrate or vegetable that I was getting. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. If you're following a legitimate carnivore or ketogenic approach and you're not leveraging carbohydrates for fuel or performance, then you don't have to have them. I mean, you can do 0 carb and function at a very high rate, a better rate, I would argue, than if you were eating the carbohydrates.
Yeah, I think that argument can be made. I mean, we've seen people do it. I've done it. I mean, I think that's pretty interesting. Interesting comment. You said that the whey protein wasn't being absorbed as well as the vegetable protein. Was that based on, how did you know that? Or was it just comments coming back from the field?
Yeah, a lot of people, for whatever reason, I think it's honestly because a lot of the whey protein, especially in America, they're just not really a higher quality whey protein. They have to be really conscious of the source, and for whatever reason, that results in a lot of people's, GI disruption, bloating, just upset stomach, and they weren't experiencing that with the vegetable-based protein. Of course, it could be the opposite in the spectrum for other people. Some people respond much better to the whey versions than the vegetable based. So I like that we offer both now for people that want to experiment and see what their body responds best to. But I found a really good source for the animal based protein, and I haven't really noticed any adverse effects in myself for sure. And then I haven't really gotten any negative feedback at all either.
I guess to further clarify, someone's hoping for an actual beef protein, not a whey, but an actual beef isolate. Which is, I know that's one of the protein sources out there. Any plans to ever expand to that? Maybe as what I'm seeing. I got to tell you, Robert, it's kind of warming my heart a little bit. But I'm seeing products out there that are saying, instead of just saying keto approved or paleo approved, they're now saying carnivore approved,
Yeah.
which means this community is growing. So there's some of the product manufacturers are responding to the size of this community. So I guess a request from our field is maybe consider making a beef protein isolate version and see, maybe you can experiment in your mad scientist lab and see what happens with that.
I'm all for it. I made like a pemmican brick, so it was like 1,000 calorie. It fit the total keto brick profile. The protein was a bit higher, but I made like a legitimate pemmican keto brick, and I think that would definitely appeal to everybody in the carnivore space. However, the cost to produce that brick is just exponentially higher than the other bricks, so I have to figure out sourcing or something to make that a viable option. I'd love to do it, and I'm not opposed to making it work, but based off of my suppliers currently, if I was to do that, it would be a significantly more expensive brick than the others, and I don't know that there'd be a market for.
Yeah, I mean, I just made some pemmican for myself the other day, it's fun, and you can play with the macros and the fats
Hmm.
and that stuff and flavor it, so it's pretty cool. But anyway, that's just kind of interesting. So we'll see. Maybe down the road we'll see what happens.
Maybe.
So assuming coronavirus allows you to compete again, is there another? I mean, because you kind of mentioned competing every couple of years. Is that what your anticipated schedule is? Just to kind of, I know, you're busy doing a company. I know what it's like because I'm CEO of this MeterX platform. It takes up a lot of your time.
Hmm.
Sometimes you have to put the athletic goals a bit on the back burner. But what is your thought on competing again? What's up next for you?
Oh, I'll definitely compete again. I mean, it's in my blood. I've competed many times, and I'm going to continue to compete. That's the beauty of natural bodybuilding coupled with a keto carnivore diet. I mean, you have the longevity aspect. It's the fountain of youth. I mean, you can continue to get better and better. And bodybuilding as a whole is, an older individual sport. I mean, like a lot of people hit their prime in a lot of sports at a very young age, whereas with bodybuilding, you continue to add that muscle and you have that muscle maturity look, and that's just much, much more appealing. So I hope to be competing, many years to come. As far as me, like in the near future, since I dieted down for 2020, I won't compete again this year or next year or probably the year after. I'll probably take a good solid 2 or 3 years off, focus on putting on some quality muscle so that next time I do step on stage, it's a noticeable improvement from what I look like this year. Just continually improving in that regard. But I've got some big things in the works right now. I've got a lot to keep me busy with regard to the business. I'm working on that book. I'm working on a course. We just bought that building, so I'm having a year to refurbish and revamp and renovate all of that. Basically move our headquarters up to Northwest Arkansas. So I've got a lot on the table, but once all that levels out, then it's going to be back into the competition season for sure.
Good, and you're keeping your wife from going insane. I mean, you guys, how's she doing?
She has not gone insane yet. Although I will say that I definitely test that sanity. I mean, the studio that I'm in right now is in our current building, current warehouse, and we live here. Like my bedroom is a office right across the hall, and we've basically just gone full blown into the business. I mean, we've committed to this. This is our livelihood, our life, and our passion. So she's built out her brands. I've built out this brand. We've worked together. We have several crew members now, and we've just made this our reality, our life, and we love every minute of it. But I got to tip my hat to her for sure. There's probably not a whole lot of women that would be excited to hear the fact they're gonna live in a warehouse space in an office. It's just not appealing to most people, but I love it.
Yeah, it looks like you guys are having fun. It looks like you're having fun with it, and I think that's probably one of the most important things you can do. I mean, it's like have fun and figure out how you make money at it. I mean, I think that's
Absolutely.
rather than the other way around. A lot of people are just working and not having fun. So let's talk a little about your hunting, because I know you're doing a lot of hunting still. Are you still doing some of that? And
Oh
tell us
yeah.
a little bit about that stuff.
Yeah, so I've been shooting the bow. I've been into hunting my whole life. I just was raised hunting. My dad's a biologist. We have a family farm down in South Arkansas, so we hunt there every year. We got our Thanksgiving down there every year. But I just got into bow hunting last year, so I've been shooting the bow pretty much every day. I've been scouting around our farm quite a bit to find where their patterning is, where their feeding areas are. But I've been diving deep into bow hunting. I feel like I'm attracted to things that require a lot of discipline and just consistent effort. And that's why natural bodybuilding appeals to me. Bow hunting is the same. Like with a gun, you can not shoot your gun all year long and then go out there on opening day, see a deer from 300 yards away and kill the deer. Whereas with bow hunting, you have to pretty much be practicing that on a regular basis, or else you're not going to be able to put a well-placed shot on an animal. And I feel like if I'm going to eat that animal, I owe the respect of, putting a well-placed shot on it. So hunting to me, it just goes hand in hand with the lifestyle that I've chosen to live, especially since so much of my calories are comprised of meat. I mean, if I'm going to be eating meat, I feel like it makes sense to be gathering that from my own, whenever possible. So I'm a big advocate for hunting and conservation and just doing right by the animals.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one thing a lot of people don't realize, that most hunters, professional hunters or people that do it on a regular basis are actually helping out the ecology rather than, what's being portrayed at that. I guess one of the issues for you is, I don't know what you're hunting, but it's tough to kill ketogenic animals.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a problem is it's getting enough fat with these animals. You find that to be the case?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I've got a freezer full of venison, and venison is just incredibly lean. Um, that's why I kind of add the brick in with the venison because I'm able to get that fat ratio up a little bit. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of fat on a deer. So having fattier options, having the oils, having the butters, having the suet, like having beef paired with venison or wild game, and or the keto brick, it just makes it all work. But I love being able to eat food that I harvested. I put in work to bring to the table, and I feel like if you have that connection, you just appreciate it so much more, and you don't waste it. Like one of my frustrations is just seeing how much food waste exists, and like we don't throw away any food. We throw away zero food. Or even our dog's carnivore. Like he gets raw venison, he gets raw beef. I mean, it's we use everything, and I feel like you owe it to the animals to respect that and not waste any more than is necessary. And I don't really think anything should be necessary.
Yeah, no, yeah, there we go. I think that's a really good point about not wasting, because that's something that, when I was eating even a healthy, health food standard diet, fruits and vegetables. I mean, gosh, I would throw away half of it all the time. You got to
Hmm.
try to buy these organic fruits and vegetables. If you got them even in a little bit of bulk, more than about a 2 day supply, man, it was like, dang, these things are all moldy, and you just didn't want to eat them. And it's just, so you do definitely save things by doing that. I guess you could grind up your freezer full of venison and put it in your keto bricks. There's your supplier, man.
There's you go. That's how I'll offer the carnivore keto brick. I'll just be Robert killed venison mixed in there.
There you go. That'd be fun. So, trying to think what else. What else, Robert? Is there anything else you think we need to know as far as how to be successful on a ketogenic diet, or what kind of pitfalls? What are the big mistakes people make on a ketogenic diet, particularly if they want to have athletic or bodybuilding goals?
Well, it all just depends on the goal and the individual. I mean, I see a lot of people trying to go to keto or carnivore 3.0 or 4.0 before they've ever laid the baseline foundation of 1.0. I mean, if you were to look at things through the lens of like an 80-20 analysis, I mean, 80% of your gain is going to come from minimal effort, and that minimal effort can take the form of just eating a basic whole foods, quality, nutrient sourced, meal plan, whether that be carnivore or keto, having some vegetation sprinkled in there, but predominantly animal based, with good quality sources. I mean, I think that's going to be able to solve the vast majority of people's issues. If you really want to get things dialed in and take it to the next level, like in the context of a complete body recomposition, like in a bodybuilding setting, then it's going to require a lot more detail-oriented tracking and nutritional manipulation. So a lot of people get caught up in, do calories count? Do you have to track your macros? And I would argue that most of those are all, 2.0, 4.0 3.0 types of questions. And when it comes to taking it to that level, just ensure you've got a good baseline to begin with. And then when you have that baseline, really dial it in and hone in on the numbers. I mean, it's going to require more effort, more energy to have that. I mean, it's not normal for humans to be walking around at sub 3% body fat and looking like a Greek god. I mean, if you don't want that, if you just want to be healthy, then, I mean, you can do what humans did hundreds of thousands of years ago. If you want to look like a Greek statue, then it's going to require a little bit more effort. It's totally doable. And it's very cool to do it following a protocol that the mainstream media says can't be done because you have to have carbs to do it.
Yeah, let me just go back to some of the original stuff that I wanted to touch on this point. I forgot to ask you, but let's talk about the reverse diet aspect of it. You know, because when you say you get down to this extremely low level of body fat, you see a metabolic slowdown. How do we bring that back up? Because a lot of people get trapped in that. They chronically over diet, and their metabolic metabolism shuts down, and they end up they just get fat when they try to ramp that back up. So how do you turn your metabolism back on?
All right, this is a topic that I am very passionate about, and I've just been shouting this message from the rooftop for years. So I want to make sure everybody's tuned in here because there's just so much bad information about this. Your body's smart. It's evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to survive. When you start taking your calories down, as most people do when they're trying to lose body fat, your metabolism is also going to follow suit and down-regulate so that you're going to survive. That's a normal phenomenon. It's a normal process. You have to expect that. However, you have to have a period in which you reverse out of that deficit, be it a maintenance or a surplus, to ramp that metabolism back up. There's a lot more to it than that, but you see so many people just chronically stay in a deficit because they haven't hit that goal weight yet, or they don't look like they want to look in the bikini yet, or whatever it may be. But you have to cycle through. And for instance, if you start at a high caloric intake, cycle down, reach a low level of body fat, then cycle back up a little bit and then cycle back down. And each time you cycle down, you go through that system, you're going to be able to have a better starting baseline caloric intake and metabolic rate. And then when you cycle down to the low deficit, you're going to reach a lower percent body fat than you did the prior time if you cycle through and have that maintenance and surplus. If you're chronically staying, in a caloric deficit, your metabolism is going to continue to slow down, and you're going to be doing yourself no favors with regard to making this a sustainable lifestyle that continually improves. You're going to get worse and worse and worse over the years.
Did you find, as you've done this cycle, several times over the years, that you were able to eat in maintenance more calories? Did you find, because you got bigger, so I would assume maybe you can eat more calories maintenance wise now.
100%. And I don't know the science behind this, but, calories matter whether you're on a carnivore diet, keto diet, or, bro diet. But I have noticed that my body is able to tolerate significantly more calories on a keto carnivore diet without near the adverse effects that it would experience if I was on a heavily carbohydrate-based diet. So, like I said, I can eat 3,700 calories now and not really see any adverse effects. I don't feel as optimal and tuned in if I'm at that much of an intake, but I can tolerate that without having just this obscene amount of body fat gained. Whereas if I was taking in that amount of food with a large percentage of it being from carbohydrates, I would absolutely experience more gain in body fat.
All right, final question. When is the book going to be done? Do you have a title yet? When's it going to come out, maybe? Do we know?
I'm deep in the book, man. I've been waking up at 3 every day and chipping away at it, but I'm hoping to have it done, at least the manuscript done, by the end of this year, and then probably spend January, February polishing it up, refining it, and probably releasing it early next year. And it's going to be all about ketogenic competition prep. So it's pretty niche, but the thing about bodybuilding is a lot of the principles that bodybuilders use and implement are applicable to people that have no intention of being a bodybuilder. I mean, the same general methods hold true.
All right, good stuff, Robert. It's been a pleasure, man. Let us know where to find you, where to find about your keto bricks, where we can find out where you're up to, social media, any of that stuff.
Yeah, so I'm Keto Savage, Keto Savage on social media. KetoSavage.com is my website. I got the Keto Savage podcast. Had you on there, I think twice, I believe, Sean. And then the Keto Bricks or KetoBrick.com and Keto Brick on social. So type in either one of those to Google and you'll be able to find me.
All right, my man. Good stuff, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for, again, Robert, it's a great resource. And so I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people that are taking notes, and these guys are going to be, playing with their fat and protein ratios and seeing what happens. So it's good to see. And, I suspect as more people get success, more people are going to do it, and it's just going to continue to help people. And like I said, I always like it from the health aspect of it, because I'm not a bodybuilder, but I come at it from a doctor standpoint. But I still do the athletic stuff anyway. All right, guys, thank you very much. Tomorrow, you guys take care. We'll see you later. All right, take care, Robert. Bye bye.
Take care.